That is sticking to it. Thank you very much. I'm here because I'm on an extended book tour. Most people would say a book tour should last 6 weeks or a month and a half. Or anyway, I've been doing this for a year and a half, having a great time. This is presentation 110, and so since you keep inviting me, I keep showing up, and I'm having a really good time. It started, I didn't plan to write a book, but because lieutenant governors, there's not really a market for lieutenant governors' books. And of course, most lieutenant governors want to be a governor, and that was me too. So I planned to write a book after I became governor, after I was done being governor, and I could tell you how great it was and how great I was. But as most of you who were then participating in politics in 1990, you know that did not happen, and I went off and had another very interesting life that did not include being governor of Minnesota. So let me start a little bit on this back journey to just tell you sort of where I got started, because I'm a kid who grew up in a very small town. I was born in Braham, Minnesota, population 720 when I lived there. Now it has 1,250 or something, but it has fewer businesses today than it did then, because back then we had 2 or 3 small manufacturing companies, one of which made potato pickers that sold to Russia. So that little town in the 50s and 60s understood something very basic about international trade, if you could say that, something that we're still trying to struggle with today. My dad was the founder of Minnesota's first electric cooperative. So many of you have probably, if you don't now, you have probably lived in a region served by electric cooperatives. And our cooperative, now called East Central Energy, was Minnesota's first. At the time it was founded, it was called the PICK, for Pine, Isani, Kanabec, Chisago, and Kanabec counties. And Dad founded it with a few other people, a few other farmers in 1936. So this year, ECE is celebrating its 90th anniversary. And I was lucky enough to have written this book just in time. So they invited me to speak last year at the annual meeting. And in the course of preparing for that presentation, I found an old newsletter from the first year of the co-op, in which my dad had written a letter to the members. My dad had an 8th grade education, and at that time, they had a staff of 3 or something. So I know that this letter was written by him, and I'm quite sure there was nobody editing it. And I was blown away by how articulate it was, and that I probably couldn't have even edited it myself to make it any better. I read the letter to the group, and you could have heard a pin drop, and I could barely get through it without tears. So it's, growing up in a family like that with co-op mindset, it's really a sense of service and collaboration with the community all the time. I mean, I don't think there was a dinner conversation in our home that did not include some aspect of co-op life that day. Sometimes, when the power went out, our phone was where they called. And so, it's like everything was really down home then. Dad was the mayor of Braham for several years when they hired the first police chief in Minnesota. So for those first couple of years, Leroy Pearson, I still remember his name, came by the house every night at 8 o'clock for a cup of coffee with the mayor before he went out on his rounds and we went to bed. And so it was a great life growing up in that small town. I had my first experience in advocacy as a high school sophomore when back up a little bit. Earlier that year, my sophomore year, I went and took a day off from school and went with my dad to Minneapolis, St. Paul for the day, because he was meeting with Mondale, who was Attorney General at the time. And he wanted me to meet him, and it's one of those, each of us got to take a day from school once in a while and make a day trip with Dad to the city. This was my day. And so after Fritz and Dad talked about whatever they talked about, they invited me to join them at the table, and Dad said, I'm starting to think about colleges, and did he want to give me some advice? So you may remember that Joan Mondale was the daughter of the Macalester College chaplain. And Fritz had attended Macalester for 3 years earlier before law school. So he said to me, you should go to Macalester. There's this fabulous political science teacher there, G. Theodore Mito. He's small in physical stature and a giant intellectually. You'll just love him. He's just blah, blah, it goes on and on and on and on. So of course, I decided, of course I want to go to Macalester. And I went home and sent a postcard to Mac and asked for materials. This was, of course, a long time before internet and no email, so I had to wait for the catalogs. Remember those packages of college catalogs that came? And they came, and I'm reading through it, and I find out that Macalester doesn't even accept applications unless you've had 2 years of high school foreign language. Now, what is that about? I mean, it wouldn't exist now. That rule does not exist anywhere in America at the moment. But it existed then. And of course, Braham did not have foreign language. So of course, I complained to my parents and said, do something about this. And they said, no, you do something about this. And I said, no, you're the parent. And they said, you're the one who wants a foreign language. You go to make a case, go ask for a meeting with the school board and go talk to them. So what do? When your parents won't do it for you, you have to do it for yourself. And so that was my first experience. And the good news is they were responsive, they were respectful. And the better news is that one of the coaches had studied Spanish as a minor in college. So he went to the school board and said, I will teach Spanish if you're offering it, then I'll do something instead of what he was doing already. So that was my first advocacy program on behalf of something that I cared about, and it was successful. So I was pretty heady for a 10th grader. And then I applied to MAC, and I went to MAC, and then I was chair of the Young Democrats at MAC, and participated in 66 in organizing the precinct caucus for Sandy Keith. Most of you will remember Sandy Keith. Became a good friend, but he was running for governor that year. He was lieutenant governor and running for governor against Karl Rolvag in the primary. And we organized the precinct caucus that Macalester sat in. And I wasn't old enough to vote, of course. We had to be 21 then. But I wasn't too young to organize. Well, we won the precinct, of course, because we were good organizers. But turned out that Doug Kelm lived in our precinct, and he worked for Karl Rolvag. So he was not happy at all. So he took us to court and said students did not have the legal right to participate where they went to college. So we had to go to court. My first political fundraising experience had to do with raising money for the court costs. The lawyers worked pro bono, but we had to pay for the paperwork. And of course we lost. But then in the subsequent legislative session, Nick Coleman, some of you will remember Nick, he was the Democratic majority leader and a very charismatic person that all of us who knew him grew to love him. But I didn't know him then, but he introduced a bill because he knew about this case and he was supporting Sandy as well. He introduced a bill that allowed college students to vote and participate in politics where they went to college. Minnesota was the first state in the country to pass laws like that. Now, there are many states allow that. Not all of them, but many do, including Minnesota. And that happened because of action we took in the 60s. So that was also pretty heady because even though we weren't lobbying the legislature for that, their action was because of what we had done in that campaign. It was very affirming, and for me, it's a really good reminder of how important it is to encourage young people to act on what the opportunities are at any given moment, because you just can't anticipate. I mean, who could have anticipated what happened to us? It's just not possible. So, you just work at it, and sometimes things get to be bigger things, and it's all really good. So then I left, finished MAC and started a business in 1970. Some people would say that I started a business because I couldn't figure out what else to do with my life. And I think that they wouldn't be wrong. I think it's a fair assumption, maybe. At any rate, it makes a good story. And I had a great 12 years. And during those years, it was It was one of those periods in history when a lot of women like me were starting businesses from nothing. You know, we started ours with $200 a piece for two of us. So we had $400. Our desk was a door across two-door file cabinets. You remember those? And it was lonely. There weren't very many, and when there were, we were kind of odd. And the newspaper was writing stories about us. So when the newspaper wrote a story about Susan Sands starting her business, I thought, oh, I got to call her. So I looked in the phone book. Of course, we had phone books then. And so I could find her. I called her, found out she lived, 4 blocks from me, and her office was in the 3rd floor of her, the attic in her house. So the next day I was sitting in her attic talking about her, talking to her, getting to know her. She's still a friend. And she and I went to Washington a couple months later because we read in the newspaper that the National Association of Women Business Owners was getting organized. And we said, well, we're going to be part of that. So we flew to Washington and told them we wanted to be the first chapter outside of Washington. And Susan Hager, who became the first chair of the NABO, she said, well, our bylaws don't allow us to have chapters. Just start your own organization. We'll stay in touch with you. And we said, well, change your bylaws because we want to be part of something bigger. We want to be a Minnesota chapter, but we want to be part of a national movement. So they looked at us like, who are these characters from Minnesota? But they did change the bylaws. And so we became the first chapter, now has 15 or 20 around the country, and it's still going strong. NABO celebrated its 50th anniversary last year, and I was at several celebrations, both here and in Washington, for that, which is very exciting. And during this time, I was also active in the Minnesota Women's Political Caucus, which was a bipartisan feminist political movement at the time. Subsequently, during that same period, the Republican Feminist Organization and the DFL feminist organizations were created, and so the bipartisan was not as well thought of by some. Some of us believed that bipartisan was very helpful because neither party was really doing right by women candidates, and I felt that a bipartisan effort was warranted, and so we did both for a while. Anyway, that's kind of how I got involved in politics as a short version. And I met Rudy Perpich because in 1978, you may remember, he was governor for a matter of 2 years. He had been lieutenant governor and he became governor when Wendy Anderson, the then governor, appointed himself to fill out Mondale's term when Mondale resigned the Senate seat to become vice president. And the Minnesota population did not like that. So in 1978, when he had to run for a full term, they unelected him and everybody else except for Joan Grow among the Democrats that year. But Rudy had 2 years as governor. And during those 2 years, he did some very important things, but the most important thing he did was appoint Rosalie Wall to be Minnesota's first female on the Supreme Court. And there were very few states in the country that had any women on the Supreme Court at that point. And it was huge. It was very controversial. Rosalie had a huge campaign against her in her first election after she was appointed. They pulled out all the stops against her, but she won. And ultimately, those people who were against her, including Judge Foley, became one of her fastest friends and supporters down the road. So I called Rudy's campaign in 1978 and said, we women want to do a fundraiser to say thank you to Rudy for appointing Rosalie Wall to the Supreme Court. And they'd never heard of anybody volunteering to do a fundraiser before, much less women. I don't think women had ever done a fundraiser at that point. Now that also seems impossible now because we're all raising money all the time for people, and that's as it should be. But at any rate, that was the first time for everything, and that was it. And it was at my apartment. I had very little furniture, so we had lots of room to mill around. And I provided the food and the drinks and collected the money, and all Rudy had to do was show up with Lola and thank everybody, hang out. And everybody had a great time, including him. So that was his first introduction to me and mine to him. And a couple more times during that year, I had opportunities to engage with him about things that mattered, asking for appointments at a time when Mark Dayton, you remember him, he at that time was the governor's scheduler. And Mark tried to keep me from getting an appointment with Burbidge twice. And I said, Mark, I'm going to get an appointment. And he said, we'll give you that appointment I'll give you, he thought I was calling because I wanted to be appointed to the Small Business Commission, which was true. And he said, we'll give you that appointment. We don't have time for a meeting with the governor. And I said, well, if you don't give me a meeting with the governor, I won't accept the appointment. And I knew they were short of knowing any business people to appoint to that committee. So it was pretty safe. Turned out to be true. He said, okay, you can have 10 minutes. And of course, what I learned about Rudy, which those of you who know him, will remember, a 10-minute meeting with Rudy was not possible. He was not constitutionally able to limit a conversation to 10 minutes. So I had a great time with him, and then I went back a few months later with a group of foreign journalists from the World Press Institute that Mark didn't want to give a meeting to either because it was election season and they weren't voters. And I called him again and said, Mark, you might as well say yes now because I'm going to keep bugging you until you do. It'll save less time for you to say yes the first time. And he did, gave us 10 minutes again, or 15, I guess. And the meeting was much longer. The governor had a wonderful time, engaged with these international journalists. And about, 20 or 30 minutes into the meeting, he jumps out of his chair, as classic Rudy would do, and says, Marlene, come with me to the office. So we're in the conference room and we're going to his private office. So of course, what do I know? I follow him in there. And he says, okay, in a few minutes, I have to leave to fly to Wadena tonight for a fundraiser. And there are 4 more empty seats on the airplane. So I can take 3 of them if you'll go along to take care of them. But if you can't go, if you're not available to go, the invitation for them does not exist because I will not be babysitting them. So I said, well, I was available. So we went back to the group and he said, okay, 3 of you can go with me to this fundraiser in Wadena tonight. It's going to be a very classic DFL fundraiser. Shimoleski will be playing. Some of you may remember that name. He was a polka band guy from the Iron Range. And this was going to be at the VFW in Wadena, and it was, you can imagine what it was. So they were excited because they'd never even heard of such a thing. And I went along, and it was everything one could hope for in the absolute classic case of a small town, rural Minnesota fundraiser. The women lining up to dance with the governor, Shimoleski, doing the polka all night long, and brats and beer. It was just ridiculous. And it was so much fun. And that was kind of the last time I saw Rudy until a couple months after the election when everybody lost, and he's on his way in New York, getting ready to go to Europe. And I was in Washington on NABO business, and I called him and said, could I come up and have dinner with Lola and him? And he said yes. So I just went up there and, had a nice dinner and thanked him for all the things he'd done for women during his term. Well, I now understand that when you lose an election, people stop calling. People stop answering your phone and they stop calling you. And so I reached out to him, and I was one of the few people. So he remembered me for a very long time. And in my case, he remembered me for 4 years, which was a really good amount of time, because in 1982 in June, he called me to run with him on the ticket that year when he decided to come back and run again against the party's candidate. Now, there's something else interesting and important about 1982, because before he was deciding to do this, he was talking about it, and the press was writing about maybe he would do this, and he was thinking about having a woman running mate. But 2 other important things happened in that same couple of months. The Republican Party had a convention, and there was pressure on their candidate, Ludeman, to select Nancy Bradis as the candidate for lieutenant governor. Those of you who knew Nancy Bradis, she was the first woman in the Minnesota State Senate elected independently. She was a very, very attractive candidate, very smart. I mean, there wasn't a negative thing about her. She would have been an outstanding candidate, but she was too much for them to handle. So, of course, I chose someone else whose name I don't remember. Then the Democratic Party was nominating Warren Spanis, who was a very popular attorney general. He was under pressure to select Joan Grow, who was the Secretary of State, so she had already been elected statewide in her own right. She was also a very smart, articulate, and in her case, beyond what Nancy had, she had been elected statewide and had campaigned. I mean, would have been a huge asset to the ticket. And Warren couldn't handle that either. So the public was watching both of the political parties and saying, really? I mean, there was a lot of conversation out there about how ridiculous this was and how ready the public was. It was pretty clear the public was ready for a woman, but neither party was ready. So Rudy took advantage of this. And in Minnesota, we have an open primary, so Republicans can vote in our primary or vice versa. So we won that election, that primary election, by fewer than 25,000 votes. We were outspent 10-1. We spent $100,000, and the Spanis campaign spent $1 million. So it is a good reminder all the time that a strategy does matter. It's not always about money, but it's almost always about timing and opportunity and being in the right place at the right time. So for me, that was obviously the case. Besides being the first woman lieutenant governor, I was also the first lieutenant governor who had ever had a specific assignment of policy responsibility for the administration. In the past, lieutenant governors had been a figurehead only. When Rudy was lieutenant governor, he and Wendell Anderson didn't have so much as one private conversation. Never. So Rudy wanted a different model for our administration. So during the campaign, we talked about two things that I would be responsible for specifically. One was directing a state tourism marketing program. And the second one was to chair an open appointments commission. It was his goal that by the end of his terms, all the boards and commissions to which the governor made appointments, from the Board of Medical Examiners to the Board of Accountancy to all the 15 or 20 in between, all of them would be integrated by gender and race by the end of our terms. And in order to do that, he wanted a commission to publish the vacancies, to invite people to apply, for us to interview all the people who applied and recruit where we didn't get applications, and to give him a list of 3 to 4 or 5 possibilities for each appointment, and he would make the choices, of course, because that was his constitutional obligation. By the time we left office 8 years later, every board and commission had women on it and had people of color on it. Separate from the judges, which he made similar commitments on the judicial appointments, but that was judicial appointments I had some influence on, which I write about in the book. A couple of very fun stories, but I won't share now. But I didn't have responsibility for those, for all of them. Sandy Keith was chairing that committee. But the process of putting women and people of color on those other boards was a huge undertaking and so rewarding. And today, the Board of Medical Examiners, we put the first African American on that board, Dr. Cassius Ellis. He didn't apply, but we got no applications except for white guys. And so I thought, oh, brother. So I started making cold calls around town just to ask people, anybody, because I didn't, we all know people who look like us, that's the bloody truth. And so I called around and said, who knows somebody, a woman or a person of color who's a doc who would be a good person on this board? 3 different people recommended Dr. Cassius Ellis. So I thought, well, he must be something good. So I called him up cold, said, this is Marlene Johnson. I'm your lieutenant governor, and I would like to ask if you would consider being a candidate to serve on this board. It's a governor's appointment, and I gave him the spiel. And he said, why would I do that? And I'm, if he's right next to you, but I have no eye contact with him. This is all on the telephone. And I said, well, this is what we're trying to accomplish. And I've made lots of calls, so I know your reputation. And I know that you would be really good in this position. So I can't guarantee you the appointment, but I can guarantee that you'll be a candidate for the appointment if you're willing to do this, because it's really important that we make these changes in our society. So eventually he agreed to be a candidate. The governor appointed him. It was like it was on virtually every one of those boards. It was so controversial, you'd think that I had killed a rat. I mean, it was just ridiculous. People were so upset. But in this case, Dr. Ellis was appointed. 2 years later, his colleagues on that board elected him the chair, and he served as chair for his final 6 years on the board. And today, the Board of Medical Examiners is more than 50% women and people of color. So there you go. It was a really important start and a reminder to all of us that intention is absolutely necessary no matter what other leaders in the country say. We cannot build a society that serves everybody if we don't do the work, and we have to do it intentionally. So it was a great opportunity for me. And eventually I also took on the children's agenda, and with the governor's support, and became the children's advocate for our administration and for the state. And then, of course, we had 2 terrific years. The governor decided to run for a 3rd term. Wasn't a good idea. We lost the election big time. And I had to decide what I was going to do next. And a couple years later, I did run for mayor of St. Paul unsuccessfully, as you will know. But it was an important moment, because in that experience, I came to understand that I would not be running for statewide office, that I would always be damaged goods with the party that I connected to, because I had defeated Warren Spanis. I had helped defeat Warren Spanis, and I would ultimately never be, forgiven for that. So, it's the way life is. It might not be fair, but it's okay. And I went on and had a very, very exciting life. And another thing that happened while I was lieutenant governor, a very special, important thing, was that I met Peter Frankel, who is the man I ultimately married. You can read the book to find out how we met. It was kind of a serendipity moment in the office. I took a meeting that the governor was supposed to do, and he couldn't do it in the last minute. So I can thank him on a number of ways for that as well. And Peter and I got better acquainted by the mail, and eventually, got married in 1988 and had a transatlantic life, because he had a business in Sweden and I was a politician here, and it wasn't practical to live both in one place or the other. So we lived in both places. And anybody here lived in Sweden or have close connections in Sweden? So one of the requirements of life in Sweden for a Swede is that every Swede has the legal right to 3 consecutive weeks of vacation every year. Think about that. Before I knew Peter, I had never had 3 consecutive weeks of vacation. And I didn't know anybody else who had 3 consecutive weeks of vacation. And I can tell you that it's a very good policy. Since I hung out with Peter, I've had 3 consecutive weeks of vacation every year. And it's a wonderful thing. Builds good families, makes sane people. It's a good thing. At any rate, we had a summer house in the south of Sweden, and At our last night there in 2010, Peter fell down a flight of stairs during the night on his way back from the bathroom to bed and suffered a serious brain injury. He was in a coma for almost 2 weeks and then in the hospital for several weeks and then in rehab, and ultimately in January of that year the neurologist concluded he would not be going home. So he lived the last 9 years of his life in a nursing home in Sweden, and I spent those years, I was still working, running a nonprofit international education office in Washington. I went back and forth. I created a remote work opportunity for myself before COVID. We didn't have the name, we didn't have the concept of remote work at that point, but I was doing it 1 week a month, and I was working at night because of the time difference. So during the day I was with Peter at the nursing home, and during the night, in the evening, I was working with the office. And yeah, I was learning a lot during that time about caregiving and trying to influence the nursing care staff and lots of things. And so I'm going to close very soon now. Peter died in Christmas Eve of 2019, right before COVID. And he'd been in the nursing home for almost 9 years. And I phoned Pauline Boss to tell her. Pauline, anybody know Pauline Boss? She is a University of Minnesota emerita academic. She's done the work on the field of ambiguous loss. And her first book was called Ambiguous Loss, defining what it is. At that time, in the 60s, she was working with families who had a soldier who was MIA. Then she was working with families who had drug dependence or alcoholism. Then she worked with 9/11 families, the service workers' families, and ultimately she wrote a book called Loving Someone Who Has Dementia. Pauline is a brilliant theoretician and academic and practitioner, and she's been a friend of mine for a long time, and I counseled with her for a period after Peter's accident. But I've stayed in touch with her as a friend, of course, and I just called to tell her that he died. And she said to me, "You have to write about this." And, thinking, it's now by this time, I'm thinking now it's COVID, and I'm thinking, and I'm sitting around with nothing to do, yeah. So by April or May that year, I started writing, and I wrote 50 pages about those last 9 years. And I showed it to Pauline, and she said, "Well, girl, you're a good writer, and there are many good stories here, but if you have to write the whole story, because otherwise nobody can make sense of this last 9 years. It doesn't make sense. You have to write the whole story." And so after cogitating that for a few weeks, I started writing, and I wrote for another year, every day, 6 days a week, pretty much. And I got to 300 pages and went looking for a publisher. Eventually, it took a while, but eventually I got the attention of Eric Anderson at University of Minnesota Press. And he said, "Well, I really think you have 2 books here." And I said, "Well, it's interesting, but I'm not writing 2 books. One book is a really good thing, I think, at this point, but you have to help me make it into 1 book." So he said, "Well, the chronology doesn't work yet. We have to come up with a different framework." And he worked with me for 9 months and helped me do that. I rewrote the whole thing, but he did a lot of guiding. It was fantastic conversations. And eventually he got to the point where he said, "Okay, I'm ready to recommend that we publish this." So here we are. And it's been a great journey. I can honestly say, I know that all of you probably know other people, maybe you yourself have written a book, and many people who've written books who I have met these last 2 years have told me that it's just a royal slog. But I can tell you, for me personally, it was not a slog. It was totally a lot of fun. And I don't understand why that is, but maybe I just needed to get it out. Maybe having spent so much of my life believing I couldn't write, it was really fun to realize I could. And at any rate, I had a really good time writing it. I've had a fabulous time sharing it. It should be illegal to have as much fun as I'm having. And so thank you very much for being here, and I look forward to your comments and questions. Thank you. Yep.
Thank you for coming.
Here's a microphone.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I guess my question is, biggest barrier for you as far as being the first woman lieutenant
The
governor?
biggest barrier. Well, I think the first barrier was, I don't know if it was what barrier for me, but the first thing was the public's recognition that they were more political party. And, I had what I didn't share in these comments, but I do mention in the book. I had been very interested in being governor before this all happened. I'd only told 3 people about it. We'd met, so I was taking notes. And thank you. And when the news stories were in the paper about a woman candidate, I wrote in my journal. It's in the Historical Society, so eventually after I'm dead, you can read it. I wrote in my journal that said, if Rudy wants to win, he'll call me. When my mother heard that, she said, there's no arrogance in the rest of the family because you have it all. Anyway, so I think there were people who just didn't believe that it made sense. And some of them were my friends. I had a friend who had the Chamber of Commerce in Duluth at the time. I'd worked with him on women business owner stuff. And when I was up there doing a campaign event, he took me aside and he said, Marlene, do you really believe you're up to this? And I looked at him and I said, yes. Are you? I was just shocked because did you ever ask a male candidate that? And he just looked at me and kind of was embarrassed. He took my point. So, there was stuff, but it was that moment in time. It was to the point of time. We all have to be ready, even when the opportunities aren't obvious at the moment. And then there's an opportunity. You've got to, for instance, there is a new county attorney is going to be elected in Olmsted here. Huh? Yeah. So this is an opportunity. This is somebody who before. So she's a known quantity. She ran when she knew she couldn't win, but she ran because she needed visibility. And she had a vision. She was looking in the future, and that's what we have to do. So if you don't have enough to do between now and November, you got to support her and get out there and door knock and whatever you got to do, because we're here. Oh, here she. Sorry. She's my candidate for county attorney. I know this is a bipartisan organization, so don't get me and the organization in trouble. But okay, sorry. Next.
Are there other questions? How do you think having been up against the party ticket and so outfunded, how do you think you really you did that with so much kind of at your back?
Well, I really think that women did that. There's an example in the book of a moment in which one of the Iron Range legislators was annoyed with me for something I said in a conversation. The governor was in the conversation and he went, you don't, blah, 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 blah. What do you think you ever contributed to this campaign? And I said 25,000 votes. And Rudy just smiled and, moved on. But the point is, because we had organized women business owners and because I was a bipartisan feminist, a lot of Republican women felt comfortable voting in our primary. A lot of Democratic women did not support. They were angry with me and they were supporting Warren Spanos. But the difference was made up with the entrepreneur women of both parties. And, there were other people too. There were Iron Range, there was an Iron Range, there was a very strong Duluth vote. So, and Sandy Keith. Something happened, I did it. Anyway, Sandy Keith was supporting us and he, was from down here. So we had a lot of good things going, but it was a tight race. But this is where strategy comes in and timing. It's tired.
We could let her use that's.
Well, whoever asked a question, and then I'll use it.
This is for the recording. The batteries.
I'll be as nice as I can if there are more. Back here.
Whoever. First.
I guess my question was, what were things you did or things that you would recommend doing when you felt like giving up? Because I can only imagine that had to have been times where you felt like giving up.
You know, I really don't think about giving up. It's not an option for me. Not every day do you have the same energy level. Of course, some days are much more exciting and interesting and energetic than other days, but I don't think I ever considered giving up. I was having a lot of fun. I really believed in what I was doing, enjoyed the work. It's like I enjoy this work. I have friends who say, "Why the heck are you doing this? You're so tired and you're doing so." Really? And I'm having fun. I could be playing golf or bridge like you guys, but I'm not. I say that to my friends, It's like, I don't know how you can do that, but they don't know how I can do this, and I'm having a good time, so why should
You've talked a bit about executive and judicial branches. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can make the legislative branch improved, and especially the concept of reducing the size of it.
I'm not qualified to have an opinion on the size of the legislature. I've never been in the legislature, and that's one of the things that caused people to wonder about me, because I hadn't paid my dues. And to be fair, I don't think I would have been the best legislator. I think I'm a much better executive branch person, because I'm a person who thinks about strategy and I think about big picture. It's why I had such a fabulous time when I was CEO of NAFTA, because it was a big picture and we had strategy to think about and articulate, and that's what I'm comfortable. That's what gives me joy. So I don't think I'm really the best person to recommend how the legislature should go, but we have really good legislators and they got to figure it out. So elect a good legislature.
So what's the most important decision you made in your whole career? And if you could have all of us go out and do one thing in the next 6 months, what would it be?
Well, the two most important things I did for my own career, there are two. One is to run with Rudy, and the other is to become CEO of NAFSA. Without question, those two opportunities were meant for me and gave me joy every bloody day. I think every person's contribution must be personal to them. I cannot tell you the right thing to do, except that when you look around and see who's willing to represent you, whether it's for the county attorney, the Congress, legislators, you have to support them. We have to get them elected. It's absolutely critical. And whether it's going door knocking or whether it's writing postcards, whether phone calls, whether it's writing checks or all of the above, you have to do more than you've ever done before. When you've just done as much as you can do a little bit more, because the consequences of screwing this up, you don't even want to think about. We're living through the consequences of having given up too soon last time. So we better not do that again. We just have to keep doing it, and whatever it takes, and it's hard, but this is not the time to go dancing, or, you can go dancing once in a while, but this is not the time to give up on the give in to the playtime all the time. This is the time to give up all your time for what you care, what matters to you. And for those of you who have been standing there with our immigrant community the last 3 months, thank you. I have ever been so proud of being connected to Minnesota. I have had communications from friends all over the country and all over the world. People are just blown away by how Minnesota has demonstrated the capacity of compassion, tenacity, caring for each other, and standing up and standing for the right, up against the wrong. So, I mean, this is a great place, and the work is not done, but we have had a really great start to a miserable year. Yeah.
I just want to be sure that nobody leaves without taking the chance to buy this great book. Marlene has them up there for $25. And if you would like to purchase one of the books that the Rochester League of Women Voters put together 15 years ago, but it was based on women who were firsts in our community between 1970 and 1990. We have 25 women. If that's of interest to you, this was published earlier, so it's only $20.
And it's got a chapter on Nancy Bradis, which
Yes, it
I'm
does, it
really
does.
glad. She was a fabulous woman.
And I don't know if you're going to stay for the annual meeting, but if you're not, be sure to take home pie. There's containers. Help yourself before you go. And I hope you'll stay for our annual meeting. And thank you to Marlene to come down and talk to us about her great life.
Thank you so much.